The City of Oakland, UCB, and the East Bay Regional Parks District applied to FEMA for an emergency grant which would supply partial funds to cut down non-native trees in the East Bay Hills, from Richmond to Castro Valley, for fire abatement. In 2010, FEMA held public input meetings in our area that few knew about. As a result, they received only 114 comments for their records. Based partially upon these 114 comments, FEMA developed a 3,000-page environmental impact study regarding the removal of tens of thousands of non-native trees and shrubs in the East Bay Hills, including 11 of our regional parks. As best I can tell, there's no provision for replanting, and I'm very concerned about what our unique forested parks will look like when the sawdust settles. I attended the last 2 of 3 public input meetings. And by the way, the meeting planners have done a very poor job of notifying the public of these meetings. The second meeting had a dismal turnout, but because several concerned citizens frantically sent out information via social media and called in the local news stations, we boosted the attendance to over 200 people for the final meeting. You can comment on this proposal until June 17th, and you should, because if you don't, the next thing you will hear is, and then it'll be too late.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Helen Kozoriz, Shoemaker, and I am the moderator for tonight's discussion. I am a resident of Montclair in the Oakland Hills and have lived in the East Bay for 28 years. I would like to say a few words about how this event came together. I'm sure that some of you attended FEMA's final public comment session on May 18th at Claremont Middle School regarding the Draft Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS, for the East Bay Hills Hazardous Fire Reduction Project. I had heard that the 2 previous FEMA public comment sessions were sparsely attended. However, there was a line out the door at the final meeting, and during public comment, many people had said that they just found out about the project and were not properly notified. Last Saturday, I attended an informational forum for the North Hills Community Association membership. To my knowledge, that was the only community-organized event on this issue. A representative of the University of California, who is one of the 3 project proponents, and the Claremont Conservancy, who supports the project, spoke to a small group of Hills residents. The Hills Conservation Network, or HCN, also participated in the forum. Tonight is the first time there will be a public discussion about this highly controversial project. UC Berkeley, the East Bay Regional Park District, and the City of Oakland want to remove more than 80,000 trees in the East Bay Hills. These public sector entities are also planned to deploy a 10-year program of herbicides. This attempt to reduce fire risk is to be funded by a $5.9 million grant from FEMA. Given the scope of this project and its potential impacts, the purpose of this forum is to provide an opportunity for the community to hear about different visions for our hills and ask questions. Unfortunately, the Claremont Conservancy declined to participate. However, HCN will talk about the important work that they've been doing, and I would like to thank them for their participation in tonight's forum. Thank you. Following their presentation, the panel will take questions from the audience. Please write your questions on the cards that have been provided and include your name. We will announce the names of the questioners. Everyone will have an opportunity to speak. We ask that you line up in front of the microphone. Each questioner will have 2 minutes to state their question to the panel. And if you have additional questions, please fill out another card. You're more than welcome to do that. Before we begin, I would just like to remind everyone that the draft FEMA EIS for the proposed project is currently under review, and the public comment period ends on June 17th. This is the deadline for the community to have input on the final EIS for the project. Please refer to the FEMA website and HCN's website for more information. I would encourage everyone to submit comments on the draft EIS and contribute your voice in advance of the deadline, if you haven't done so already. And finally, there are donation envelopes on the back table for those of you who wish to support HCN's tireless work on this issue. So without much further ado, I would like to introduce the speakers. Dan Grassetti founded HCN 7 years ago and lives in the Claremont Canyon area. He has lived in the Berkeley-Oakland Hills for the past 45 years. He works as a technology entrepreneur and has been active in assisting the City of Oakland with their emergency response capabilities. He was recognized by the city for having developed and implemented a citizens' emergency radio communication system that has been incorporated in the core program and has been rolled out across Oakland. Peter Gray Scott was born in Berkeley and currently lives on Alvarado Road behind the Claremont Hotel. He was living in the East Bay during the Berkeley-Oakland Hills 1970 and 1991 fires. Peter is a charter member of the Claremont Conservancy and is one of the directors of HCN. He spent 13 years on the City of Oakland's core task force and instigated the grand jury investigation of the 1991 fire. Peter is an architect, author, and activist. Let's welcome the speakers.
Okay, well, thank you. So first I want to recognize Helen for causing this to happen, because were it not for Helen's nearly constant haranguing, we wouldn't have gone through with this, but she harangued constantly, and here we are. And yes, and just to restate this, we really did want this to be a session where folks from the other side of this issue had a chance to state their case. And we implored them to do that, and they said, public has enough information, that's it. So with that, we'll get started. So first of all, I think there are a number of things we can all agree on, and one of those is that we all really want fire risk mitigation. Nobody wants to have a terrible fire. And so that's really, it's not a question of whether you want to have a fire or not. None of us really wants that. And for those of us in our core group, 3 of the 5 of us lost our homes in the 91 fire, and so it's a big deal for us, and so we're really concerned that there be real fire risk mitigation. One of the things that comes up all the time is that the 91 fire is somehow related to the need to do this. And while fire risk mitigation and fuels management is probably a good thing to do, it should be made very clear that the 91 fire, according to the grand jury report and the FEMA analysis, and even the folks on the other side of this issue, when they speak officially, acknowledge that that fire really had very little to do with any kind of vegetation, much less eucalyptus trees or pine trees or acacias. And you know, all these anecdotes about, well, somebody in Australia once told me that you should never live near a eucalyptus tree. Well, that's an interesting anecdote, but it's hardly justification for cutting down 80,000 trees. And so we've been trying to be very, very science-based and factual in our assessment. We don't rely on anecdotes, and we'll do our best to just be truthful and honest and give you the straight scoop. So one of the things the grand jury investigation found was that there were a lot of things wrong that resulted in the 91 fire. but most of those had to do with the Oakland Fire Department and the City of Oakland. And the Oakland Fire Department responded very poorly. There were huge problems with things like hydrants that didn't function or were not usable by other fire departments, lack of training, lack of mutual aid agreements, radio communications that fell apart within a few minutes of the crisis. Water ran out in something like 25 minutes or something like that. So there were a lot of things that went wrong. And subsequent to that, there was a group formed of all the local agencies called the Hills Emergency Forum that set about to try and fix those things. And they've actually had a lot of success. And manifestation of that success is we've had two significant fires since 91, one on Charing Cross Road, which was the epicenter of the 91 fire, and another below Broadway Terrace that had all the potential to be catastrophic events as well, but they were managed really well. They were very aggressively fought and they were brought under control quickly. And so we can see that there were lessons learned were implemented and the results speak for themselves. So, you know, given that really the 91 fire and most of the fires, as far as we know back in the history of Berkeley and Oakland, had very little to do with vegetation, why the focus on vegetation? And why this vegetation in particular? So, a little bit of background here. In studying this issue, what we learned, and we've been studying it now for 7 years and talked to a lot of experts, is that ground fuels are the real problem in vegetation, and that in the absence of ground fuels, you pretty much can't have a significant fire. There's no possibility of a fire getting started and getting up into the crowns of trees if there aren't a lot of ground fuels. So all the experts say you really have to focus on ground fuels. But what do we have here above? Above the Berkeley Hills? Well, we've got a lot of UC land in particular that has been unmanaged for decades. And the result of that has been there's quite a significant accumulation of ground fuels. It's stuff falling off of eucalyptus trees, stuff falling off of all sorts of other trees, bay trees, various vegetation that's died over the course of decades. And it can burn. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. So the obvious question is, well, if that's the problem, well, first of all, vegetation isn't a big problem, but if vegetation is a problem, then why don't we go after the vegetation that seems to be the source of the problem? Well, some agencies are doing that. East Bay Municipal Utilities District has a bunch of eucalyptus groves in the very top of the hill, and they manage those by thinning out, increasing the spacing between the trees, removing the ground fuels every 3-4 years, and they don't use any herbicides to do it because they're the water company, and it would seem kind of wrong for the water company to be dumping herbicides into the water, or so we think. East Bay Regional Park District has been moving more and more in similar direction. So what are we talking about here? It's about 1,000 acres altogether for these projects. They're spread from Miller Knox up in Pinole down to, I guess the southern extent is probably Caldecott Field off of Highway 24. And of those 1,000 acres, about 500 of them are East Bay Regional Park District land. And about 270 roughly are UC, and the rest is City of Oakland. So it's very important to look at the three project proponents very differently, because they're actually doing very different things. And so, you know, we're not into having a broad brush assertion that all of this is bad. We want you to understand specifically who's doing what, and you can come to a conclusion about which parts you think is okay and which parts you don't. So East Bay Regional Park District is probably the one we're least concerned about, and the reason for that is that this FEMA money is simply additional funding to do programs that were already sued. We sued them, actually, in 2009 and litigated or discussed and ultimately settled. So there's nothing new here. East Bay Parks has been very clear that they're just going to use this money to do stuff that was already agreed on. And in fact, we've seen a general improvement in the way East Bay Parks is doing the project. So we're not terribly concerned about them. Oakland, we're not entirely sure, but we think that for their properties in Caldecott Field and Skyline, they're going to do similar types of work as East Bay Regional Park District. Our real problem is UC. Surprise, surprise. And UC basically owns Strawberry Canyon. They own the upper part of Claremont Canyon. And they have a memorandum of understanding with the City of Oakland to manage Frowning Ridge, which is the area that connects Strawberry Canyon and Claremont Canyon. So it's one contiguous piece of land, about 265 acres, basically all of the area above the campus. And really they're the ones that we're concerned about. So why are we concerned about them as opposed to the other ones? Well, UC's methods are very, very unusual. It's a nice way of putting it. What UC wants to do is they will remove every single eucalyptus, pine, and acacia tree in those 265 acres. It's about 50,000 trees. Then they will poison each eucalyptus tree by lovingly applying herbicide to the stump. And they will do that right after they cut the tree down, and then they'll do it again twice a year for up to 10 years to make sure that the tree is completely dead. They will then take the tree, and if it's less than 24 inches in diameter, they'll chip it on site, and they'll scatter the chips on the ground up to a depth of 24 inches, so 2 feet of chips on the ground. And then for the trees that are greater than 24 inches, they'll drag them somewhere to use them either as erosion control or alongside some road. And that's what they want to do. So it's an unusual way of dealing with this, and it's something that no fire management agency will do. And one of the problems with it, forgetting about the habitat destruction and the herbicide use and the erosion issues, is that there is an extreme fire risk associated with putting 24 inches of chips on the ground. So in fact, we got hold of a consulting report that FEMA sponsored that never made the light of day, but we got hold of it. And it said that it was essentially crazy to do this. It's somewhat nicer words, but basically said it was kind of crazy to do this, and why on earth would they do this if it would create such a big fire risk? So I think if you ask UC why they're doing this, they'll say, well, it's cheap because you don't have to haul the trees somewhere else, and it covers the ground with a layer of stuff that's supposed to suppress growth. Well, growth of what? Well, guess what? When you cut down the tall trees and you eliminate the shade canopy, very, very quickly after, you get hemlock, thistle, broom, and poison oak in wild abandon. And I kind of think broom is pretty, but most people don't seem to like those species, and they're an extreme fire hazard. So what happens is they're trying to suppress these guys, but it hasn't worked in the projects that they've done so far. That comes up, and then what happens is they have to then spray those guys with Roundup or Stalker or Garlon to keep them under control. And so it's a big problem. And this is one of the reasons that East Bay Regional Park District won't do projects like this anymore, because they effectively become a maintenance nightmare. It never really ends. In fact, East Bay Parks had one on Skyline. They cut the trees, they were spraying, and the neighbors downwind started complaining that all their plants were dying. Probably wasn't very good for the neighbors either. But so they said they can't do that anymore, and so they've got a big problem. So they won't do that anymore. And for the projects that they've done at the same site, subsequent, they have left eucalyptus trees standing for the shade cover, because they recognize that getting rid of shade is a very bad idea. So I won't go on too much longer here, but I just want to say that there's a basic problem here, that the public is being given sort of a false choice. The choice that's being presented is either you accept this EIS or you're against doing anything. And that's just a lie. The truth is that there are 3 agencies who have different methodologies, but we would characterize East Bay Regional Park District and the City of Oakland as being pretty close and being sort of moderate in what they want to do. It's not ideal, but it's sort of moderate. UC is the real outlier agency, and we've been battling this issue since 2006 to try and get UC to simply adopt methodologies that are more about fire risk mitigation than about something else. So what's the something else? Well, some people have suggested that maybe the reason that UC is so adamant about cutting down all these trees has to do with the fact that they really want to do facilities expansion in Strawberry Canyon and Claremont Canyon. Perish the thought. And in fact, if you read the EIS, it pretty much says that in there, that they want to put faculty housing in Claremont Canyon, which is so far an undeveloped area, so on and so forth. In fact, they felt so strongly about sticking to this methodology that when we started insisting that there be an EIS 6 years ago, instead of giving FEMA the answers that they were asking for about why, these guys are asserting that your programs won't actually reduce fire danger. You think you can answer those questions? Well, UC said, no, we don't think we can answer those questions. In fact, the way we're going to handle this is we're going to go to Dianne Feinstein, and we're going to ask her to pressure Janet Napolitano to push FEMA into not allowing the EIS. So we have a letter that I can show you at some point from Dianne Feinstein. It's fairly astonishing. But the long and short of it is FEMA stuck to their guns, and they actually did the EIS. But right now I'm pretty darn sure that FEMA's going to feel a lot of pressure on this. And really that's our biggest source of concern, because I think the facts are on our side here. We kind of know how to do this. We have a lawyer working on it who does this kind of stuff, and we've got some experts, and they're like, geez, this is open and shut. I mean, there's just no justification for doing this. The worst part about it, I didn't mention this part, is it actually increases the fire risk. But in spite of all that, the way these things can work is that political pressure comes to bear, and so we're fully expecting that in spite of the fact that you all have been doing a wonderful job in getting comments to FEMA, we're going to get some great comments to FEMA. FEMA's going to review those. There's a real chance that FEMA will just say, well, it's all very good, but we're going to stick to the EIS as it is. And if that happens, we have to sue them. And we think that we can prevail, but it just takes money. So at any rate, I won't bore you too much longer here, other than to say that we really appreciate the public support here. We can definitely win this, but it's going to take you all writing letters to FEMA, writing letters to your representatives, and opening up your wallets probably. So with that, I'll turn it over to Peter, who'll talk a little bit more detail about this.
Well, this is my old stomping grounds. I was a kid around here living on Spruce and Arch and Euclid and LeConte in all of my early years, so this is home to me. But I would venture that there is no one more interested in mitigating the risk of fire than me, having gone through 2 of the fires, lost everything. And so when after the 1970 fire, where I stood on the roof of my house and watered it down while the airplanes came down Claremont Canyon lower than my house, I was very much impressed with how we live with risk. And then when the 1991 fire happened and my house burned down, and I learned that after the 1970 fire there was a grand jury investigation that told the Oakland Fire Department to do 3 things: fix your hydrants, fix your communications, and put the wires to the pumps to the reservoirs underground. And 21 years later, they hadn't done any one of the three, and they all became major, major problems in the 91 fire. I was outraged. And so my wife and I marched down to the grand jury and said, you know, we've got to get some honesty here. We've got to have the city and the fire department and the officials take responsibility for what they do or don't do, just like professionals do. And so we went through that, and in the process we learned a lot of things about how things work. And so when Dan sort of stirred up our little neighborhood, pointing to what UC had done in the mid-canyon of Claremont Canyon, where they had really brutally clear-cut. I know they don't like us to say clear-cut because they'll insist they didn't cut everything, but this was raw ground with stumps and trash, and that area is still that way after 6 years. And the area eroded so badly that Claremont Avenue on the downhill slope had to be repaired. I mean, it's just a disaster. So how they can point to what they've done in the past and say we're going to do more of the same, I cannot fathom that mentality. But anyway, so we've been after this, and part of our early investigation was to get with East Bay Regional Parks and say, what are you doing? And we went on a tour with the fire chief of the park district over near the merry-go-round in Tilden Park, and they showed us what they'd been doing. And you could go there today and see the spaced, tall eucalyptus trees with the ground cleared up underneath and the understory under control. And it is gorgeous, and it is not a fire hazard. And so we were, our awareness was raised, let's say. And after UC's treatment in Mid-Canyon, that was supposed to be phase one of 2 phases that East Bay Regional Parks was doing. That's another story, how UC got to manage a parcel that was East Bay Regional Parks, but that's another problem. But anyway, we walked through the phase 2 with the fire chief and the assistant fire chief, and actually I have a picture. You can see how steep the slope was. As we walked through, this is under eucalyptus so high that they're out of the picture. They're 3 or 4 times as high as these trees. And the fire chief said, as he walked through the duff on the ground, he said, you know, we wouldn't want any less than this. Now, you know the whole big story about eucalyptus is that they're so messy and they create such a fire hazard on the ground. Well, I agree. I don't argue with that, but I'm just saying that on that one tour, we walked through under an unmaintained eucalyptus forest, and he said, I wouldn't want any less duff on the ground because it would become, on this slope, an erosion problem. So, you know, there's more than one way to look at this. So, anyway, the upshot of that was that we negotiated with the 2 of them to agree to a 2-step program where they went through and cleared up the understory. And the understory is obviously the problem. I could read you 15 quotes from experts. The experts that the other side quotes in their well, they don't quote them, they just name them, but they don't quote them. But that absolutely establishes the consensus of experts that says the stuff on the ground and the stuff near the ground is what starts the fire, what drives the fire, and what delivers the fire to the crowns of the trees. If you can avoid that, you're in good shape. Anyway, so East Bay Regional Parks agreed to do this two-step process where they cleaned out the understory and limbed up the trees up to about 8 feet. And then they, if there were trees that were too close together, you know, closer than 15 feet or so, they would choose which ones of those to cut. So they basically cleared out so that you could see under the forest. And then, after that point, we walked through and said, okay, which trees would we cut now? Well, there were so bloody few. It was really ridiculous. I mean, to compare that protocol of treatment to what UC is proposing now is just, it's black and white. It's crazy. So anyway, after the confrontation between HCN and East Bay Regional Parks, where we threatened litigation, they sat down with us at the table. Now, why we couldn't have had that conversation before we threatened litigation, that's a good question. But you know, after so many months and so many dollars, we finally got to sit down with them and we negotiated what they would do in their, I think it's a tenure plan. And the upshot of it was that because we sat down with them and negotiated with them, they, all of us, got a better plan out of East Bay Regional Parks. Because when they first proposed their plan, it didn't have any detail. They didn't tell us how many trees were going to get cut, which trees were going to get cut. They just talked about this huge number of tons per acre. And so there was no guideline. And so when we sat down with them, we hammered out what the spacing of the trees would be, what the percentage of canopy would be preserved, and all of that kind of thing. And the net result is we have a safer situation now because that happened. And so that's why, at this point, when we're talking about the EIS and FEMA's approval of what's in there, we're saying, look, East Bay Regional Parks went through a whole process of looking at alternatives. They listened, they were open, they were reasonable, and we hammered out a better plan. And if the City of Oakland and if UC would follow that protocol, we wouldn't have a problem with it. Now, you know, I've written my own response, already sent it in, but I think what FEMA is begging for is another alternative to what's being presented in the EIS, because basically UC has, as they have for 10 years, said take it or leave it. This is our plan. Take it or leave it. And we're saying, no, wait a minute. There's a softer, gentler, more reasonable, more environmentally friendly, and more effective in terms of fire mitigation plan that could be pursued that you've ignored. And so, at least in my response, I gave them another alternative. And I think that that's what we should hammer on, that there are other viable, reasonable alternatives besides UC. And so my position in this right now is either UC toes the line in terms of what's reasonable, or kick them out. You know, accept East Bay Regional Parks plan, accept the City of Oakland's if they agree, and they tell me that they agree with East Bay Regional Parks. Let those go through, but absolutely give UC back some of their own medicine, you know, either join the group or get out. Now, I must say, Tom Klatt, I don't know if you recognize that name, but Tom Klatt has been the guy from UC who's championed this thing from the beginning. He has said that if FEMA doesn't come through for them, they'll go ahead anyway. Well, you know, how do you feel about that? I don't even know what to do with that. I just, it makes me angry. But anyway, I've probably gone on too long. And there's a whole bunch of aspects to this. I mean, I've focused on fire mitigation, but the impact on the environment in terms of habitat, in terms of water and air quality, and in terms of carbon sequestration, each one of those things is a mind-bogglingly huge issue. And that's why it's so important to get a reasonable plan out of this. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Claudia wants to say a few words.
Hi, my name is Claudia Sinelli, and I am a third-year law student, and I'm also a Rockridge native, born and raised, and a very concerned citizen. This plan is monstrous. Some of my major concerns would be there are other things that are notably absent from the conversation. For instance, right after the fire in '91, we had a huge landslide problem off of Broadway Terrace in the area because the fire had burned all the trees and had completely destabilized the hillsides, and then we ended up with the landslide. And I don't know if you guys remember in the news, people's homes just sliding down the hill. And they don't seem to be addressing that issue. The FEMA plan, the EIS report, none of this seems to really be addressing the landslide issue that we are sort of presented with. So in terms of things that we might want to talk about to FEMA, I would encourage everybody to get the latest East Bay Express. There's a new article called "Is UC's Tree Removal Plan Necessary?" And there are some very interesting points that are raised in this. There was a private corporation called the URS Corp, and they did a study. They're scientists. And they did a study, and they looked at the trees, they looked at the FEMA plan, they looked at all of this stuff, and they are raising question after question after question that are really, really pertinent things. For instance, one of the justifications for the UC plan, and might I add that in all of the casebooks, UC regents being sued from torts to contracts to criminal law, you name it. I have not seen any other name more than UC regents in all of the casebooks, constitutional law, all of it. If you look, one of their justifications for doing this is that they want to allow the native species to regrow. Well, if they clear cut and they wood chip, and all of the problems that happen with that both Dan and this other gentleman have talked about, if they were to do that, one of the assumptions that gets questioned is how can they guarantee that the type of vegetation that will recolonize is going to be native if they don't have a planting maintenance plan on the side. So, for instance, some of the things that they're worried about would also be native, aggressive exotics, such as Himalayan blackberry, French broom, all these other things. And those things also present a fire hazard, more of a fire hazard almost, because they grow in low shrubs. There's no shade from the canopy. It gets hotter. And one spark ember goes through there, and then you've got not only all the shrubbery burning, but then 2 feet of wood chips. Also, one of my major concerns, and something that I would really like everybody to address FEMA about, is this this poison that they want to dump all over the ground. I know that Roundup itself is a Monsanto product. Yes, it is. And There is the presented risk for ground seepage into the water, storm runoff into the streams, so that the wildlife, while they will have to relocate when they're drinking from the streams, are being poisoned also, which is really, really, it's just monstrous. I guess with that, I would really, really suggest everybody get the East Bay and take a look at some of these issues that were raised by this other corporation, because they're going to give you some really good ideas for what you might want to say to FEMA. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. So we're going to start with the questions. Okay, hopefully I can read them. Is that Marge Snow? Merrill. Okay. Sorry. And 2 minutes, please. And is somebody keeping time? Okay.
Hi, my name is Marilee Snow, and I live in Chabot Canyon. And I have 2 questions. One involves a wildlife census. Is there anybody conducting a wildlife census so that we know which of the tallest eucalyptus trees house sort of permanent red-tailed hawk families? And anyway, it seems to me that a wildlife census needs to be part of the EIS. I admit I haven't read it yet. And my other question is, why is the Claremont Canyon Conservancy supporting the UC plan?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll take the wildlife census. So one of the things we've learned through this process is that unless you're an endangered species, you have no rights. The only rules that they have as far as wildlife are that you can't cut down a tree while there's a bird nesting in it, a raptor nesting in it. But you can cut it down as soon as they're finished nesting. And the only species that's really protected in this whole thing is the Alameda whip snake. And there's sections in there about what they want to do to try and minimize the quote-unquote take of the Alameda whip snake. So the sad thing is that if you happen to be a deer or an opossum or a raccoon or a fox or whatever else, you're out of luck. And basically the assumption is that you're just going to go somewhere else. So that's it.
Like our gardens and our streets.
Somewhere else. You know, one of the things that we're concerned about is that there are a lot of raptors that use eucalyptus trees. They just love eucalyptus trees. So we have a bunch of red-tailed hawks, we have a bunch of owls in the area, and there's this equilibrium that's been reached over 125 years or so. And then Peter can talk more about this, but you know, once there's no raptor habitat, what happens is you get lots and lots of rodents. And you know, eventually it'll reach an equilibrium, but it's going to be an ugly process getting there. So I'll turn over to Peter for the second half of the question.
We were the first to rebuild on our hill, so we were up there alone for probably 3 months before anybody else joined us. And I remember walking along the roadway, you know, in between the ruins of all the neighbors' houses. And I had designed some other houses that were just beginning to go, so that's the reason we were out walking. But as we were walking, we were followed by a little line of rats skipping along beside us, thinking that somehow we were going to lead them to food or something, I don't know. But it was absolutely amazing. And so we had a rat invasion for a few months, and then we had an ant and some other flying thing invasion, and then we had voles, and then we had opossums and rabbits, and so we got a cat. But it was amazing what the imbalance was. Anyway, but as far as the Claremont Canyon Conservancy is concerned, I was a charter member. We sent in our money, and we were all enthusiastic about a group that was going to protect the environment. I'm ashamed at what they've done. But why do they do what they do? One is, although they they pretend to speak for the community. This has always been their gig. But really, their voice is controlled by a very small group at the top. So when they talk about HCN being a tiny group, we look back at them and say, you're a tiny group too. But this goes back to right after the fire, and I was very much involved in this. The press and people in general needed to have some explanation for how and why this conflagration happened. And so there was a great urgency to find a scapegoat. Well, the press was loath to blame the proper scapegoat, and that is the Oakland Fire Department. I mean, I can tell you chapter and verse on how they screwed up, and I consider what they did and did not do criminally negligent. But they didn't want to blame the firefighters. They were the heroes. And that's what, if you read the newspapers right after the fire, that was the whole thing. So who did they blame? The eucalyptus. And so they created all these myths about flying leaves and exploding trees and invasive species and all this stuff. And one by one, HCN has had to knock those down. I mean, you take, for instance, their story about the flying leaves creating embers that I think the EIS says the embers from the ridgetop eucalyptus trees fly 2,000 feet. That's ridiculous. I have done my own personal experiments of burning leaves and flying bark, flying burning bark, and it's absolutely not true. If you light a eucalyptus leaf, it, first of all, doesn't want to ignite. And then when it ignites, it burns with a lot of smoke and it spits. But it turns into the...
200-foot tree and watch the bark fly. No, you haven't.
I beg your pardon?
Bullshit.
I beg your pardon, I have burned...
I got pictures of the canyon that you're talking about, saying it's a monstrosity. I have pictures of the eucalyptus grove across the street on my blog that says that this is all bullshit, what you're saying. It's a lie.
Go away. Get out of here.
Okay, you guys, let's just, everybody's entitled to their opinion.
I've done these experiments with the eucalyptus bark. The bark burns in about, and this is a strip about this long, about this wide. It burns in about 60 seconds. And if you read the Australian Project Vesta, which actually did 105 experimental fires in eucalyptus groves and studied them carefully, making measurements about embers and so on. And they say, I could read you the report, but that would take too long, but they basically say that if the ember is lofted and if it burns out before it lands, obviously it's not a problem. And so the question is, how far can it get in 60 seconds? And in the Project Vesta, they say the experiment showed that I think they used the phrase tens of meters. So that's like 10 times 3 is 30. And yet, you know, we're getting people like that saying they fly forever. And that's not true.
Can you repeat that source again? Vesta? How would you find it?
Project Vesta. V-E-S-T-A. You can look it up, yes, and they have it. What was I going to say?
Yeah.
I was going to follow that up with something.
It's okay.
Oh, yes. We know in the 1991 fire that the first house was involved in the fire in the first 6 minutes. That's the on-the-ground report. Well, there's between 6 and 20 times as much fuel in a common wood frame house as there is in the equal amount of forest. And the fuel that's in a house situation, decks, shingles, and so on, those are much more likely to support an ember flying long enough to create a fire.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. So we're going to move on. And I think what I'm going to do to speed things up here is call out 3 names at a time so people can be ready. Okay, Sally Nelson and Regina Beatus and Carolyn Tipton. And
I'll do the writing.
You have 2 minutes each to speak. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Sally Nelson, and I have been walking in the East Bay Hills now for the 36 years that I've been living in Berkeley. Enjoying the wildlife and the native plants, yes, as well as the eucalyptus. My 2 questions have to do not so much with that, but first of all, it's just one is a statement. Maybe everybody here knows that Dianne Feinstein is married to Richard Blum, who is a UC regent, and he has also been very much part of the sale of the historic post offices around the country. I'll stop there. I've been working on that one too. And my next question actually area of concern regards the Sierra Club, the California Native Plant Society, and Golden Gate Audubon, and how they arrived at their position. Last week I went and spoke with someone at the Sierra Club, and it was not a satisfactory conversation. I spoke with people at the Ecology Center, and they were actually, it was a very, I felt it was a productive conversation in that they were really open to hearing. Maybe somebody from there is here tonight because they had not yet arrived at the... Thank you, Beck. Okay, if you have any comments on that,
I can comment a little bit on that. So basically there's a strong native plant restoration movement going on, and this is really at the root of a lot of this. In fact, you know, the question we ask is, well, if you could address the fire danger for a fraction of the cost, without the herbicides, without the loss of habitat, without the erosion, without the visual blight, why wouldn't you do it? And so, you know, certainly there's concerns about UC's ulterior motives, but I think the Sierra Club, in fact, we know, it's really unfair to say that it's the Sierra Club. It's really one guy at the Sierra Club, Norm LaForce, who's the head of this committee, and he's been speaking on as though he represents all of the Sierra Club, and he really doesn't. But you know, it officially becomes a Sierra Club position. So he's a very strong believer in native plant restoration, and that's his prerogative. But the problem is, and this isn't to disparage native plant restoration, it's just that native plant restoration and fire risk mitigation aren't the same thing. And that's the basic problem. And so, you know, I would say that if these people want native plant restoration on a large scale on public lands, they ought to put up a ballot measure that says, let's all put in our tax dollars to spend $20 million for native plant restoration. Let's see how many votes they get. And that's the test. And so it's not to say that it's a bad thing. It's simply saying that this money is for fire risk mitigation, not native plant restoration. And they're just not the same. Next question.
So the lady in the back, are you from the Sierra Club?
I'm from the Ecology Center.
Oh. Would you like to respond? You said that you wanted to...
No, I just rather than speak for us, I can speak for us.
Okay, I just thought you wanted to respond to Sally Nelson. Sorry.
I have a question about herbicides, but I guess we'll get to it later.
Okay.
Are you in the pile?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay.
All right, Regina Beatus, thank you.
My name is Regina Batis, and I have a concern of where the City of Berkeley stands on this. I'm part of a group called Parents United for Health, and we have always been working over the past 30 years on pesticide use in the City of Berkeley and the impact on the parks on children. There are schools that are close to this area of herbicide spraying application. Kaiser Elementary is up there. But even if a school isn't close by, I'm concerned about air quality, water quality, runoff. The city should be worried about having to replace the Claremont Avenue with runoff from erosion. So I think we should pressure the city, or our group is going to pressure the City of Berkeley, because it's unacceptable for our group to have this happen in the city. And anything that happens in Oakland, Richmond, Pinole, this is us. It doesn't really matter what city you're in. So if you have had conversations already with the city, I'd be interested. Oh, great.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we had a meeting with Susan Wengraf earlier today, and attempted to convince her that they should be concerned. And she told us that the city was officially not going to take a position on this. And when we discussed the herbicide issue, she said, oh, those dangers are far overrated. It's really not such bad stuff. So that's what we got. So as far as we know, the reason we talked to her as opposed to, what's his name? No, the guy...
Lori Capitelli?
The guy by the Claremont Hotel, who has the other hill property. Wozniak. Wozniak we can't even talk to him about it. So, and then Tom Bates has gone on record as saying that he thinks all the eucalyptus trees should go. So I would say it's an uphill fight with the City of Berkeley. It shouldn't be, but it is. Okay. Sorry, we tried.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, Carolyn Tipton, and then we're going to have Annie Halat and Virginia Browning.
I have a couple of questions. First, did I understand you to say that the East Bay Regional Parks, including Tilden, are not going to clear cut and spray poison?
East Bay Parks has a wide range of stuff that they do, and they have 130 polygons over 19,000 acres of the ridgeline. That we got involved with them on this a few years ago. And they have different prescriptions for each of the polygons, so it varies enormously from site to site. So in some areas, it's not what we would like. In other areas, it's more so. But they do use herbicides consistently. And one of the requests we made as part of the 2009 lawsuit was that they look at alternatives to herbicides, but I don't know that they've actually done anything on that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. The other question is, what is the involvement of Friends of the Earth, Earth Justice, Audubon Society, organizations that should be supporting us?
Well, the only ones that we're aware of that have contacted us have been Earth Justice, and they've offered to help. And it may come to that. Basically, the way this process works is that this draft EIS is out. There were 45 days to review it. That 45 days is up on Monday. And then after that, FEMA is going to analyze the inputs and do something. It's possible that they can come out with a final EIS that looks just great, that UC doesn't get funded and everything's wonderful and we're all happy. That's possible. It's also possible that they'll certify the EIS as is, and then we'll have to file suit. And then it gets into to what Peter was saying earlier about Tom Klatt saying that he was going to cut down the trees anyhow. In order to do projects like this, you have to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. And as of this moment, of the 3 agencies that are applying for these funds, only East Bay Regional Park District has completed CEQA. The City of Oakland definitely has not. It appears UC first told us that they hadn't, and then they came back and said, well, they might want to use their 2020 long-range development plan, which is really about buildings instead of trees anyhow. So, we don't know what's going to happen here, but certainly there's a potential that there will be a NEPA action and possibly a CEQA action if it comes to that. We would hope that it doesn't. We would prefer to have, sit down and come up with a reasonable compromise. But so far there's been no sitting down.
we need to make a proposal that we can all support, what's the process? How would you recommend that we proceed?
Well, I think it's a very direct communication with FEMA saying something like there should be some other alternative to what's being proposed in the EIS. There are kind of two separate questions on the table. One is the EIS acceptable as is, and do we object to the EIS? And the second thing is, does the plan that's being proposed in the EIS meet its own goals? Now, obviously, the one goal is to reduce the risk of fire. But there are other more detailed goals, like we're going to, with the landscape that replaces the existing forest, the flame length is going to be less than 8 feet. 8 feet being the margin where they say it's very difficult to fight a fire where the flame lengths are more than 8 feet. And if you want to get into that level of detail, you can show that the plan that's being proposed doesn't meet that goal. And the landscape that's being proposed doesn't meet the goal of being less fire hazardous. So I think in answer to your question, just that kind of plain language, going back to FEMA about the EIS, I think would carry a lot of weight. That we're listening, we understand what the object is, and we're worried about it not being delivered.
So I hear that we should contact FEMA, but each of us makes a proposal that gets very...
Yeah, I'm going to give you a really, really succinct answer here. I would say tell FEMA that they should support the HCN's proposal.
That's what we need.
Yeah, because we are putting one forward. It's going to be fully supported scientifically. We've got a fire expert consulting on it, and it's basically exactly what we've been talking about. As soon as it exists. I expect that we're going to be working all weekend and up till 4:45 on Monday.
Can I make an organizing suggestion?
Please.
I think, did everybody sign the mailing list? Who has the mailing list? Anybody? Bob? Anyway, there's a mailing list going around. Do you know where it is?
Bob has it.
Bob has it. Bob.
Yeah.
Okay. On the back table, make sure you print your email clearly, because I've done so many things like this and I can't read people's emails. Print your email. Dan will send out, won't you, sample letters?
Yeah,
soon?
So there's sample letters on our webpage. So really what we're asking you to do, so that we don't have to redo these things over and over and over again, is ask folks to look on the hillsconservationnetwork.org webpage.
Okay.
And we'll have everything there.
hillsconservationnetwork.org.
Right.
The other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to read you, if I just might interject, I'm going to give you the email address. Okay, everybody has a pen?
But it's there.
Yeah, best to get
Is
it
it
off
all
the
there?
website because it's really complicated.
And you have the fax number too posted?
Just an email. We have email and we have P.O. box.
So just go to the
it's on
website.
Right.
It's all there.
Right.
All right. So next question, Virginia Browning.
Can I try and squeeze in 3?
2 minutes.
Okay. So, okay, you kind of answered about, well, is it really going to be UC in the end? Because it sounds like, they're already determined to me, what it is people with money who know how to develop property. They donate to politicians. Politicians can't say no. So there's a huge pressure to go along and not want to think too much about it by some of these politicians. But I guess so my question is it really going to be up to UC? Or, okay, and then you said CEQA. And, okay, so the first question has to do with CEQA, because I think I heard they're trying to get rid of that. Somebody is. Is that that? And then herbicides. I just had a conversation with somebody kind of related to the city of Berkeley saying, well, yeah, these are
same thing as that person said, they're highly overrated. So I need to know, I need facts on the herbicides, you know, Roundup's really, I need to know where to get that. I hope I can get that on your site too. And then things like Audubon and Sierra Club, I mean, can't we still bring people around? Thanks.
You ask a bunch of questions there, and I'll see if I can remember some of them. But the one question was about UC and what autonomy they have here. So it's important to realize that this isn't UC's decision. It's FEMA's decision. FEMA can choose to give UC money or not. They can choose to tell UC that they have to change their methodologies in order to get the money. So the good thing about this situation is that we really believe that we have an impartial third party involved in making these decisions, and we'll all make the best case that we can. And I think in the end, if folks can demonstrate that what they're proposing addresses the risk in the least costly, least damaging manner, I think in the end that'll prevail. As far as herbicide questions, you know, we're not experts, but I think there are a lot of people in this room who are, and I would encourage those people to chat with you as soon as possible, because there's a wealth of information on that subject here, I think.
Okay. So, speaking of herbicides, Max, you're next. Max Ventura, and then Jan Robicher. Okay.
So, a couple things. I wanted to ask about the HCN's policy around herbicides and how you have approached it. What is being proposed here by HCN in this process? The other part of the question is, I'm interested in how you have come to your decision and how you're approaching the herbicide issue. Wanted to mention that, you know, these flyers are going out for the event with David Theodoropoulos. Since he's not here tonight, people can learn a lot more about native plant restoration projects, their origins, their connections to pesticide companies. So I also wanted to mention that on our website, eastbaypesticidealert.org, people can see toxicological profiles for the very pesticides that are already being used by UC in the Hills and other agencies. And you can learn a lot about the history going back to, we jumped in on this January of 2005, and so there's history going back to a little bit before that, which I think is very important in the larger framework, that this has been about not just Berkeley, but this whole East Bay Hills. And want to mention that it is tied to what's going on around Saucil Creek, San Leandro Creek, and all these and Mount Sutro in San Francisco, and all these projects to pull down trees and use herbicides.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to distill that all down to a simple question, which is what's HCN's view on the herbicides, and how do we come to that position? And our view is that we would much prefer that there be no herbicide use whatsoever. The way we'd like to see that accomplished is just don't cut down very many trees, and then it's not an issue. Because the herbicides are certainly a big issue, but there are a lot of other issues here as well. So we'd like to see there be minimal numbers of trees cut down, and if they do need to be cut down, find a method that doesn't involve herbicides to manage them, such as East Bay Mud is doing. So that's where we're at on this.
Well, the only reason they want to kill the stumps is because the stumps send up shoots in an effort to survive. And so our answer to that is, if you don't cut down the tree, you don't get shoots, so you don't need to do it. And I think the reason I went on so long about our little project up in Claremont Canyon with East Bay Regional Parks was that we kind of proved that in real life, on the ground, if you approach it that way of clearing out the understory and then looking at how many trees really create a risk because they're too closely spaced or because they're sick or something else, there are very few trees that really need to be cut. And that's the principal way of reducing the amount of herbicides.
Where is that place that you're talking about, that spot that you're talking about?
Where is it? It's in the middle of Claremont Canyon on the north side of the road. And I don't know if, what's the name of it, Geldon?
Well, it's nearest to, there's a signpost there at 29, and it's just a little bit west of signpost 29 on the north side of the road. In fact, there are two adjacent sites. You can see one that has very little other than hemlock and broom on it, and another that looks pretty good. So, maybe sometime we could arrange a tour up there. I'd be happy to show you guys some of the sites if you'd like.
Good idea. All right. So Jan Robicher and Isis Farrell.
Jan Robicher. I have three concerns, two of which have been pretty much addressed already, and maybe the third also. But the first was that, of course, if you take all the trees out, you change the climate. I mean, one only has to stand under a tree and then out in the sun to feel the difference in the temperature. And if you take away all the trees, you've changed the climate forever. And secondly, the water runoff, and the landslide possibilities, which we have already discussed. And the third, having to do with the use of pesticides, is the link between pesticides and Parkinson's disease and other neurological conditions. And I think in any effort to persuade people to cease the use of those things would be certainly some information about that. But I appreciate all your efforts, and I hope it comes to fruition. Is there any way we can get this proposal on change.org or so that it would, in the first place, gain some national attention, and in the second place, we could sign it?
Well, we have the petition on moveon.org, and we have just about 5,000 signatures. So with the people in this room, you could push it over 5,000 pretty quickly, I think. So that seems to be working pretty well. But thank you for all that, and we'll just do the best we can.
And I think in answer to your observation about standing under a tree versus not standing under a tree, I have to tell the story of Angel Island, where in all of recorded history there had never been a fire there on the island that anybody knows about. And in 1996, the state decided that the 86-acre eucalyptus forest was a fire danger. And so they cut 80 acres of eucalyptus, and immediately following in 2004, 2005, and 2008, they had three major fires. The last one burned a third of the island. And the only thing that survived was the 6 acres of eucalyptus that they didn't cut.
And that didn't burn because they had cut others. And they were very glad that they didn't have to fight the eucalyptus fire there or lose any historic buildings.
Yeah.
There were plenty of fires on the island. There were all buildings when the eucalyptus forest, when they restored it, people started going there. The vector is huge.
Would you like to speak? There's a mic right here.
Yeah.
You know what? Okay, guys.
I'd like to ask a simple question.
Just
Go ahead.
come on up.
Come on up.
Come on up.
Sure.
You need to put your name on a card.
It's okay. Let him speak. And you have just 2 minutes. Everybody has 2 minutes.
I have 2 questions. Has there been an EIS study on what the East Bay Regional Park District is planning to do?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I would like to, if that's available on somewhere where I could read it.
Yeah.
Because my other concern is I mean, I've been back in those eucalyptus forests. I've taken lots of pictures of them, and I quite frankly, hauling tons of debris from there is going to be quite expensive. And if you're going to have to do it on a 5-year rotating basis, it's going to be really expensive, very hard to do. And according to the Dovsack study, there's a lot of diverse insects and invertebrates and slugs, etc., that live in all that duff and debris that's going to be removed every 5 years, along with all the cutting and stuff. So I just don't see how your alternative proposal is any better than what we've got at Area Site 29. And I mean, I got a lot of pictures of it here. I got, my blog is right here. Anybody that wants to look and see the pictures, I mean, I'll tell you what, I'm a massage therapist, and I'll give anybody $30 off.
It's a hell of a deal.
Site 29, Signpost 29 on Claremont Avenue,
Right.
and link, just take a picture that you've been there, you've seen it, link it to me on Google Plus. And,
can we answer?
I'll give you a half-hour free massage.
Can
Go up and look at it.
All right.
Can we answer your question? Can we answer?
Okay, thank you very much.
Can we
Go
answer
ahead,
your
Dan.
questions?
All the eucalyptus trees are surviving, and the houses have all burned.
I don't. The gentleman in the green jacket. If you'd like to meet up at the site, I'd be happy to spend some time with you and look at various sites, and we can discuss the pros and cons of different approaches. So that's an offer to you if you care to accept it. And but I'll turn down the massage. Thank you.
Okay, so next we have Jean Stewart. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I got off track. Isis, and then Jean Stewart and Beck, whoever that is. Beck? Beck? Beck. Bev.
There. Okay, I'm Isis Farrell, and I'm opposed to all of the projects, not just the UC Berkeley projects. In fact, the Oakland project, we've been fighting since 2005, some of us. The environmental health community has been fighting the City of Oakland from overturning its pesticide ordinance to accommodate these kinds of programs so that they can put herbicides up in the hills. That is not allowed by Oakland ordinance. It's against the law. And Jean Kwan was the one who pushed this in 2005. Some of us who are pesticide victims have actually fought this back in 2005. Nobody else showed up but us who are sick. And we stopped them from doing it. And what did the City of Oakland do? They made a backroom deal with UC Berkeley to manage their land. How is that possible? I'd love to know if you have any insight into that, actually. But I think it is important that people know that this is going to be against city ordinance, and our Oakland mayor is violating our city's pesticide ordinance by pushing these programs. I think that we also need to keep in mind that these programs are going to move forward whether FEMA pays for it or not. It's just going to slow them down. And so I would recommend that people get your comments into the EIS, support HCN's lawsuit if it comes to that, and prepare to actually defend our forests in the East Bay. You know, I think we're going to have to take some really serious direct action and put ourselves in front of these people who are trying to clear cut our forests in the East Bay Hills and to poison them. Now, just very quickly, Max did not mention the date of when David Theodoropoulos is going to be here. He's a conservation biologist who knows a lot about this issue of how dangerous are native and non-native plants really. He's done a lot of research into it. He's going to be here just on the street at BFUU on Sunday, July 14th at 6:30. Please come out and hear a different perspective on this issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Isis. Okay.
So to questions raised, for what we know, Jean Kwan has been a big problem with all this because, to Isis' point, she was the one who changed the Oakland pesticide herbicide ordinance to allow these things to go forward. And presumably she was also involved in some way, shape, or form in this memorandum of understanding between the City of Oakland and UC. But we're going to do our best to see if we can undo that. And
explain that.
What's that? So for anybody who doesn't know, basically the Frowning Ridge property, which is the area that connects Strawberry Canyon to Claremont Canyon, is owned by the City of Oakland. But what the City of Oakland did is they signed an agreement with UC that allowed Oakland to give UC the FEMA money so that UC could then do what UC does with this land. So there's a lot of questions there, and we're certainly going to do our best to cause that to not happen. As far as the comment that this is going to move forward anyhow, well, all I can say is that nothing is inevitable, and I would say, you know, if need be, throw yourself in front of a bulldozer, but I would argue that you can do a lot more good right now by writing a letter to FEMA and, if it comes to it, helping support a legal challenge. The fact is, you know, if you don't like, for those of us who, if anybody didn't like the ultimate outcome of the Measure CC-EIR battle that was settled in 2011, we would have got a better outcome if we'd had more money. So you know, this is how this system works. And it shouldn't be this way, but it is this way. And we are very confident that if we have the funding to sustain legal actions as long as necessary, they will capitulate. I feel very confident in that. But people have got to just believe that and do what's required to make it happen. We've had great success so far, and I think we'll prevail here as well. In fact, I'm pretty sure we will prevail. And with the amount of public support we have, the odds are infinitely better.
Okay. Jean? Jean, and then it does say B-E-C-K. I don't know if it's Beck or Bev. Is there a Beck in the room? No? Okay. Must be Bev then.
Somebody help with
that. Okay. But it's oh. Let's see if I can do this. It's too high. Lower still. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I'm Jean Stewart, and my disability came about as a result of exposure to pesticides. I worked for a pharmaceutical company that manufactured herbicides, and my job involved testing the herbicides, so I handled them every day. And I developed a very invasive tumor that had to be removed several times. Anyway, I have a very strong feeling about pesticides as a result of that. But I have three comments/questions. One has to do with the Ecology Center. Hi, Beck. Beck, are you still here? She left? Huh. I'm a member of the Ecology Center, and I've been a strong supporter for many years, and I'm hoping that as a member organization it can take a position on the issue. My second comment is a response to what you were saying about politicians, including Susan Wengraf and others around the pesticide issue. Just before I came here, I printed out a toxicology profile for triclopyr, which is the active ingredient in Garlon. And it's hard science. It's not, it's not sort of hippy-dippy. It's hard science. And it's very scary. It lists the acute effects, the chronic effects, the ecological hazard summary, the risk to non-target flora and fauna. And then it lists, this is very interesting, the toxicity of the inert ingredients, and it turns out that some of the inert ingredients in Garlon are more toxic than triclopyr. And it lists the toxicity of those. So I would encourage everybody who's speaking to cynical politicians to really hand this kind of science to them. I mean, it's inarguable stuff. And if Susan Wengraf is trying to claim that the dangers of pesticides are overrated, you stick this in their faces. And the final thing I wanted to mention to everybody is that I'm a member of a little in-your-face activist disability rights organization called QUIDO. And and we printed up some little flyers, little handouts that we're starting to give out at trailheads. And anybody we brought a whole bunch of them with us. It gives you some really good resources, including a website that I think is pretty amazing called milliontrees.me, M-E. And that stuff is listed at the bottom, as well as contact information for FEMA, how you can send in your comments, either by snail mail. Oh, this version doesn't have the snail mail address. Mark, does your version have the snail mail address?
Okay.
Anyway.
All right, Jim, thanks. That's great.
We've got them here. So anybody who wants one, they're these little yellow guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jean. Any response?
I don't know what the question was.
Ah. All right.
I guess it was more comments than
Yeah, I mean,
That's okay.
I think none of us want to see this stuff get used, and unfortunately, sometimes just being honest and truthful and correct isn't enough. And so, there's certainly a sense I had in talking to Susan Wengraf earlier today that, I could have given her all the information in the world about the ills of various pesticides, and I could have explained everything we know about flame lengths and how eucalyptus are not a problem, but chaparral is, and I don't think it would have made any difference. And so, to some extent, I think, as a result of having done this for 7 years, one of the conclusions we've come to is that I think sort of a renewed faith in the legal system. I almost hate to admit it, but for gosh sakes, the only thing that brought East Bay Parks to the table was a lawsuit. We were scared to death to file a lawsuit. We got over that now, and now we kind of like it. But in the end of the day, the legal system does sort of work. And Dianne Feinstein, she can do what she wants, but she will probably lose if this thing goes to a federal court judge. So I understand all the frustration, and believe me, I feel it. It pains me deeply to see a tree get cut down. It's awful to see this stuff being sprayed all over the place, and God knows what's going to happen. But the question is, what do you do about it? And the conclusion we've come to is that we can be the most effective by playing the game. And it kind of sucks, but that's what you have to do, I think. And you can be effective. And so I think at times, we may appear to be dispassionate about this, but it's not because we're dispassionate, it's because we're just focused on doing what we need to do to win. And if we win, we win. So I think that's the best strategy.
Okay, so Bev, Marge, Hall, and John Booby. I don't know if that's the right pronunciation.
Hi.
Hi. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. I'm concerned about what's happening with the regional parks, because I saw the FEMA plan in the marked areas. It's supposed to be 200 acres of the Lake Chabot area. I'm assuming they're going to cut down every eucalyptus they can there. It'll destroy the park. I'm concerned about all the parks along Skyline. So I don't know about really what is happening with the regional parks. My understanding is eucalyptus is one thing. Nobody's even talking about the Monterey pine or acacia. There's much more species diversity under the Monterey pine than among the native oak or redwood at this point, both plant and animal. Trying to get other people involved, like the Bay Area Mushroom Society, because of the mushrooms that grow under the Monterey pine. There's all these lies and myths about them as well as the eucalyptus. They're not a short-lived tree. They can live 120 years. The dead snags are wonderful for the raptors. The baby trees come up. It's a perfect ecosystem, and it's just coincidence that they're not already in this range. You probably already know all this. I agree about the pesticides. I see where they're spraying on East Bay mud land that's also connected to regional parks like Del Val. They just sprayed every part of that place, and it goes right into the water, the drinking water. So I don't trust them either. Just want to comment about the natives versus non-natives. Most of the cities are non-natives. East Bay Regional Parks, UC Berkeley, everybody's landscape with non-natives. UC Berkeley even has a little book out about all their wonderful exotic trees. They're hypocrites. They should all have to cut down their roses and their olives and their fruit trees and everything before they touch the wilderness for the wild animals. It's outrageous. The other thing is, where they logged before into the redwoods, there had been a diversity we do not have here. It's basically extinct. You have to go to Marin to see certain lilies like Clintonius, Scoliopus. God knows what they're going to do if they get in there again and they just cut what is now still existing under the current introduced and native trees. So it's like they did a lot of damage in the past in the 1800s. And once they start, the other thing is, when you see other projects they've done where they've just destroyed areas they were not supposed to touch, I don't even know what we can do about that. But anyway, I'm concerned about the regional parks because that's kind of not what you are talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, on the regional parks, they have a plan, and I don't know if we have a link to it on our website, but if we don't, we'll add that. But they've got 130 polygons, roughly, and there's different prescriptions for each of those. And they have what they call adaptive management as well. So we weren't entirely thrilled about what East Bay Parks is doing, but you know, far and away UC is there's no comparison. It's infinitely worse. But what we have seen is, and this may sound excessively optimistic, but what we have seen is that these agencies tend to react to what they believe the prevailing public sentiment is. And up until not too long ago, the only people that they heard from were the native plant restoration community. And so they, you know, reasonably concluded that they should develop policies that favor native plant restoration above all else. And that's what happened. And I think what we saw in all of our dealings with East Bay Parks and suing them and eventually settling with them was that I think they were kind of glad that we sued them. And my sense was that they needed a reason to start moving in a different direction. And it's not 100% good by any means. But these are big agencies, these are long periods of time, and this is like, you know, turning a ship. You don't do it that quickly. So, you know, we talk about this every once in a while, about how things have changed in the past 6 years that we've been actively involved in this. You couldn't mention the word eucalyptus in one of our Hills Forum discussions without getting tarred and feathered 6 years ago. Now we can actually have a semi-civil discussion about these things. You know, what we'd like to see happen is the community come together and really drop the semi-religious views on these things and just talk about as pragmatists and dealing with the real problems. And that's the problem. It's really hard to do that because people get very emotional about this stuff. But I would just say that we see some progress in that the more we assert ourselves and say, hey, not everybody thinks that it should be this way, the more these agencies move. And I would say for FEMA in particular, they're agnostic. I mean, they just have a bunch of money. They have a grant program. They're going to give it to you if you satisfy their requirements. Mm-hmm. So I think if the project proponents can satisfy the requirements, they'll get the money. If they can't, though, they may not. And so the main requirement here is you've got to be able to demonstrate that you can reduce fire risk. This money is not for native plant restoration, however virtuous an endeavor that is. That's not what it's for. So unfortunately, if you look at this through the cold view of fire risk mitigation, you may come to the conclusion that bay trees are a big problem. You may come to the conclusion that chaparral is a big problem. And so all we're saying is, if you really want to solve the fire problem, solve the fire problem. But don't mix the two together. So I'm sorry I went on too long. But I do see reason for hope that I think we can gradually cause these agencies to have a more balanced view on what they do.
Okay, Marge Hall and John Booby.
Hi. So, if you're looking for legal tools, you might consider the Americans with Disabilities Act. It might be considered a bit like the Endangered Species Act for some humans, because for some of us, this plan will create a barrier to the use of the parks.
That's a very good point.
It will create a barrier.
It's a very good point. Yeah, we hadn't actually thought about that, but I will forward that to the lawyer this
Great.
evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have comments. Most of my reading has been about, actually, you read that EIS, and it's very long and technical. So first of all, I'd like to preface my questions by suggesting that your technical experts that you have could share some of their technical expertise, so it'll help us in, focusing our comments. So if you look at they use this modeling flame map, and they talk a lot about crown fires. They make the assumption of a crown fire, and they talk about how many houses are within 2,000 feet, I think, of the crown fire potential, and they say there's almost 5,000 houses there. And I'm wondering how many of those houses, do you know, have wood decks and wood roofs?
Who knows? But it's interesting. Can I answer?
And I have a couple more questions, but that's one. Should I ask all my questions and then?
I think we might forget them all if you ask them all.
That's one. How many houses?
Just a quick answer. If you're talking about the houses that are in the fire area, the 4 hills that burned, all of those houses that were rebuilt were required to have Class A rated roofs. So.
Yes, I know that. I'm talking about the existing houses that they refer to in the 2,000 feet of the ridge line from, by the way, it's from Richmond to Castro Valley.
Yeah.
It goes all that way.
Right.
And so they say there's like almost 5,000 houses.
Right.
And, there's no fire code that dealt with existing houses. And horizontal surfaces like decks and roofs are a great transmission. They talk about in the flame map how how many embers get projected out and the torching, but they don't talk about where those embers go and what might be the ignition potential.
Right. So
I wonder if you know that.
We don't know how many houses, but there's a very interesting thing you should know about the whole flame map analysis. You probably might want to sit down before I tell you this, but we. Okay, that's fine. I was just kidding. What's interesting is what we found is that you look at all these tables, these models, and you're not an expert, and you say, "Oh my God, this is complicated. I can't begin to figure it out." Well, we figured something out about this. They modeled 2 states of nature. They modeled the current environment with all the fuel loads that exist there today, and they modeled the environment the day after you cut down all the trees. Day after. What's interesting is that nobody expects the land to stay as it was the day after you cut down all the trees. Right. A month, 2 months, 5 years, you're going to have a different. So even the people that really want these programs to happen are saying, well, we want to have landscape transformation. We want to go from what's there now to an oak and bay and chaparral and grass environment. Well, the flame map analysis didn't analyze that. So the whole fire risk reduction that they got was by cutting down all the trees, and that day you got the fire risk reduction. But the environment that that these folks are saying is going to happen, well, that has enormous fire risk qualities that weren't modeled at all. So the whole flame map thing is probably an area that I think we put it out as one of the things that folks should comment on. It's really kind of bogus because they didn't really model what it is they expect to have happen. They modeled something different. And so the whole thing doesn't really work because you're doing all these policies to achieve something, but in the end, you're really expecting to have something else.
As one fireman said, we're just trading one fire environment for another fire environment, and the one we're trading off is a fire every 20 years for an environment, an oak bay savanna that burns every other year.
But you had another question.
My 2 other questions, a very simple one. The EIS talks about the difficulties of doing clearing of dead vegetation and steep slopes because it causes more erosion. I'm wondering your answer to that. And then it seems to be throughout the report, some mention a reference of tenures. I mean, we're cutting down trees 100 years old and changing the landscape for many, many more years. Where does the tenure thing come from? Okay, that's it.
Thank you.
Well, the
FEMA rule?
the 10-year thing is for, I don't know if this is the right answer, but it's 10 years of reapplying the herbicide.
But it's going to go longer.
Well, they say 13 years total because they have to get through these projects in 3 years in order to get the FEMA money, and then they know that they're going to have to maintain for 10 years. But the reality is that probably what will happen is that they may kill off the eucalyptus trees in 10 years, but they're still going to be poisoning the hemlock and the thistle and the broom long after. As far as the question of erosion by repeated entries and all that, that's an interesting point, and actually that's something we discussed this evening with our lawyer, and we're commenting on that. The reality is that there's going to be soil disturbance no matter what you do, and in fact our assertion is that there's more soil disturbance by doing what they are planning than what we're proposing, because they're going to have to go in every 6 months and reapply Garlon. Plus, the chips themselves create a huge problem with the soil. Apparently, they sterilize the soil and they cause erosion all by themselves. So and apparently, they also have the effect of creating an absolutely optimal environment for exotic invasives, as they call them. So it goes both ways. But we're certainly going to argue that the erosion potential is far less by going in every 3 or 4 years and removing ground fuels than it is by going in twice a year and applying herbicide.
The thing that nobody's mentioned is sudden oak death. And with all this disturbance, that's the perfect way to spread it. And if they are aiming for a ultimate environment of grass, brush, and oaks and bays, and the bays are the transmitters of sudden oak death, it's just a perfect setup for the bays to poison the oaks, and there they go. And I've been down in the country below Carmel Valley where sudden oak death has really spread, and it's not a pretty picture.
Okay, John. And then Stephanie, Thomas, and Steve.
Good evening. My name is John Bowie, and I live about 6 miles south of the university campus, where I received a master's in environmental engineering in 1971. So I know a little bit about chemistry and the environment. I'm not going to get into that stuff today. And by the way, just because I wear a Cal hat doesn't mean I'm on Cal's side. Basically, I bought a Cal hat about 2 months ago because I keep seeing all these people that I know damn well never went to Cal, and they're wearing Cal hats. And you also ought to know, as just one factoid, that Dianne Feinstein's husband was a chairman of the board of URS. Right. So I would like to know who his company is working for in whatever he's doing. Mm-hmm. URS is a big, gigantic conglomerate engineering company. They have over 25,000 mouths to feed. I actually took a job as a sub-consultant with them once. No, I shouldn't say any negative things. I mean, they work for money. I mean, in the old days when I was a young professional consulting engineer, we worked as professionals. Currently, the engineers that are in my profession work for money, the highest bidder, basically. And so I got out of that, and I now have a company that is called Managed Organic Recycling. We make composting equipment for the large guys, like waste management, recology. And I've actually made a pretty good name for our business. But I think that, and I don't want to talk about the things that I had questions about, because I think that the thing comes down to really the basics. I think that what you guys should do is form some kind of an alliance with East Bay Regional Parks and East Bay Mud. I mentioned that I live on Skyline Boulevard. I live right almost in the park. In fact, people running on West Ridge Trail always ask, how in the hell did you get a house in the park? And the East Bay Regional Park has done an awesome job of cleaning out the undergrowth on East Ridge Trail. And boy, you wouldn't believe how upset and angry the neighbors on Skyline were when that project was proposed. Now they're all in favor of it because it's an awesome improvement to the trail. So I agree with you that you don't go running out there and cut everything down in your path, and you should be cleaning up the underbrush because that's basically where fires are going to start and spread. But I think you really need to get a coalition against Cal. You know, maybe you can, in some strength, you can convince the EIS people that, hey, you really don't want to do it the way Cal wants to do it. You want to do it the way East Bay Regional Park does it.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think it's moving in that direction. In fact, you know, we get hideously optimistic every once in a while and then slap ourselves a few times. But we've seen signs that that UC is concerned that they're not going to get this money. And we've also seen a change in behavior on the part of the fire chief of East Bay Regional Park District, where he used to defend UC to the death, and he doesn't anymore. So
he's a really good professional guy.
He is.
If you can get him on your side, and some directors in the park, who I believe are pretty smart people,
yeah.
And East Bay Mud, you know, they have a huge acreage up there.
Right.
And I don't know what the proportionate share of Cal is versus everybody else.
Cal's actually not that big, and
so you know, basically take them on.
Yeah.
Get the group to take them on, not just yourselves.
Well, I would like for that to happen. I think, as I was explaining to Bev earlier, these things change gradually. You know, in the past 5 years, we've seen really substantial change, and I think I think this thing is going to be possibly the tipping point in this whole battle, because I think if we win this, then you know, that's going to be the last we're going to hear from Cal on this. I mean, we may have to sue them under CEQA to get them to stop, but I think they're finished as far as trying to advance
funding, federal funding.
Yeah.
I mean, you can probably show. I mean, you can probably have a consultant show that their EIS is fatally flawed.
Right.
With the way they've put it together and what they've said on certain areas. So anyway, I'll wrap up. I want to note that I love redwoods, and out behind my house, my neighbor and my friend have planted over 40 in the past 3 years.
Okay.
We're all in favor of redwoods as well.
Okay, so just to let everybody know, we have about 5 minutes left, and then we have to unfortunately end. So the people that we haven't heard from yet are Stephanie Thomas, Steve, Melissa, I think that's Washburn, and Carla Kaminga, and then those are the last of the questions. So I don't even know if they're still here, but Stephanie Thomas is next. Great.
We'll be as fast as we can on the responses.
So we have 5 minutes left, you guys.
And I'll be quick.
Maybe so.
I'll be quick, and I was wondering, not having read all of this, but if any of the trees need to be cut, it sounds like there might be some. Some information has come to me that there are different alternatives to handle the regrowth and prevent use of the pesticides, herbicides, whatever you want to label them. And one I've heard about is to cut the stump all the way to the ground and then cover with some kind of a tarp. And what I was thinking was, and I don't know, let's say East Bay Parks or Oakland, or actually Oakland, or whoever gets the money, how it can be spent. But I know that there are many youth that need jobs. And I know that there are many volunteers. I've seen volunteers. I've been a volunteer with many projects to go and help with this. And in fact, I think it's Tilden, they used to have a little ranger program, you know. So there's all kinds of sparking community interest in taking care of this problem, and then people will be drawn. You know, it's, in other words, tapping our resources.
So The EIS talks about these other methods, and just the quick answer is they say, well, none of them are economically viable, so we're not going to consider it. So, but I think, you know, this is like everything else. It's kind of a negotiation. So if we were able to cut, you know, to reduce the number of trees by 80%, well, then it becomes far more reasonable to talk about alternative methods of getting rid of the 20%. Mm-hmm. So they're tied together. Yes?
Just want to give a little factoid since we're talking about money and pesticides. That's in 2005 when we were fighting this against the City of Oakland to start out with. There was a plan to hire a licensed pesticide applicator for $125,000 and whatever else per year, just, you know, for the services. That wouldn't have included the chemicals, and we proposed that you could do $20 an hour jobs.
Exactly.
An awful lot of people out of work
right.
at that time.
Right.
So there's money.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point, because what we've seen throughout all of this is, you know, the project proponent for UC has made the statement, foolishly, that he's going to do this program whether he gets the FEMA money or not. Well, implied in that statement is he's got money to do something. So why is he so intent on spending it this way rather than another way? But you know, we have to get there, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, UC has this opinion, and probably the only way to change it is to force them to change it, and the only way to do that is to prevent them from getting federal money, and then probably to prevent them from using either federal money or their money under CEQA. But I hope it doesn't come to that, but there may not be any alternative.
Okay, so Steve, are you still here? And then Melissa Washburn, and then the last question will be from Carla Kaminga, if she's still here.
What is CEQA?
California Environmental Quality Act.
Yeah, I'm more into direct action, but in a 20-year campaign, Earth First up north in Northern California saved approximately 8,000 acres of redwoods. We had, over that period, we had 50 tree sitters, including Julia Butterfly. So I say, if this is done under false pretenses, for the most part, why don't we occupy the trees? If more young occupiers knew about this issue, more about it, they would be outraged. And, you know, letter writing is good, but there's nothing like direct action and blockading this or whatever to make the news and arouse public opinion. So I highly recommend, I'm going to tell all the occupiers I know, and maybe you could speak that down there. They have a warehouse in Oakland called the Holdout, where they all hang out, a lot of them, and they have talks there, and you could speak to them.
Well,
because then I think you would get a lot more publicity and attention, and I think it would be over in a short period of time when the occupiers.
All right.
Well, we're with you. So it's not one or the other. It can be all of the above. Yep.
Called coalition building. Right. Okay, Melissa Washburn and then Carla Kaminga.
Hi, I'm Melissa Washburn. A lot of these issues have been discussed already, but I did have a couple questions. One is, have you contacted the Save the Bay organization, Sylvia McLaughlin's organization? I'm sure she lives maybe 5 blocks from here, and I'm sure she'd be really disappointed to hear that pesticides are going to drain into the bay that she worked so tirelessly to save.
She was, actually.
Okay.
We had a nice lunch with her and some other people, and she, I think, is very much in support of what we're doing. In fact, we're working closely with one of her associates on this, who's been very helpful in causing this to happen. So, yes.
I think they'd be a great organization. And the second question is, has anybody looked into the there's all this press all over the world about the declining honeybee population. And the eucalyptus flowers are a tremendous food source for the honeybees. And if nobody's really mentioned that or written anything about that, I think it might get great press.
That's a good point.
Those are my two questions. And I wanted to thank you very much for all your hard work.
Well, thank you.
Go ahead, Charlene.
Those are great questions.
The ground cover makes it impossible for
Right, right, right. Yeah. You know, one of the things that we pride ourselves on in our little group is being totally abysmal in publicity and getting the word out. We shun publicity. You know, if reporters knock on our door, we tell them to go away. So, but we need to change that.
Yes.
And you all can help us change that. So please be patient with us, as we're pretty inept at the publicity side of this. We're pretty good on the legal side.
Can I say a word about that?
Oh, please. Sure, lay it on.
Would everybody like to know how hard it was to put this together, to get HCN to come out here and speak to the public? All right, that's all I'm going to say. One last question, and then we have to close the forum. Carla Kaminga, is she still here? No, she's not. So I don't know if I can read her question for her. What involvement does other parts of California have with the East Bay, say the Columbia, California School, with classes of forestry? That's the question.
I don't understand the question.
Here.
All right, let's see here.
Try to answer.
What
Try to
involvement
answer
does
everybody's
other parts of
question.
California have with the East Bay? Say the Columbia, California School with classes of forestry. I don't know how to answer this question. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I just want to thank HCN so much.
Thank you, Helen.